In January of 1968, the North Vietnamese army launched a surprise attack against the Americans. This was the Tet Offensive. Tet is the celebration of the Lunar New Year, and there was a tradition in Vietnam that had gone on for decades that there was never any fighting on Tet. And yet in 1968, the North Vietnamese generals decided to break with tradition with the hope that they could surprise the Americans, overwhelm them with force, and bring a swift end to the Vietnam War. They attacked over 125 targets across the country with over 85,000 troops. Now here's the amazing thing. The United States actually repelled every single attack, every single one. And at the end of most of the major fighting, which was after about a week, the United States had lost fewer than 1,000 troops. The North Vietnamese lost 35,000 of the 85,000 troops. And if we look at the Vietnam War as a whole, we see that America lost 58,000 men, and North Vietnam lost over 3 million people. And a close examination also reveals that America actually won nearly every major battle it fought. So it raises a very interesting question. How do you win all the battles, decimate your enemy, and lose the war? It raises new questions about how we understand the concept of winning and losing. James Carsey, a theologian from NYU, wrote a little book called Finite and Infinite Games, in which he talks about games and how we play them. Basically, if you have at least two competitors, you have a game. And there are two types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. Finite games are defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective, like football. We all agree what the rules are. We all agree whoever has more points at the end of the game is the winner. The game concludes and we all go home. Then you have an infinite game. An infinite game is defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is to perpetuate the game, to keep the game in play. When you put a finite player versus a finite player, the system is stable. Football is stable. When you put an infinite player versus an infinite player, the system is also stable. The Cold War was stable because we cannot have a winner or a loser, and so we both keep playing until one of the players runs out of the will or the resources to keep playing, and then they drop out of the game. Problems arise, however, when you pit a finite player versus an infinite player, because a finite player is playing to win, and an infinite player is playing to keep playing, and they make very different strategic choices. And invariably what happens is the finite player finds themselves in quagmire. They find themselves frustrated and running through the will and resources required for them to stay in the game. And this is what happened to America in Vietnam. America was fighting to win, and the North Vietnamese were fighting for their lives. A very different set of strategic choices were made. And it's not so much that America lost, it's that they ran out of the will or the resources to continue to stay in the game, and so they dropped out. So this gets me thinking. There's no such thing as winning global politics. There's no such thing as winning governance. And there's definitely no such thing as winning business. But when we listen to the language of too many leaders, they don't know the game we're in. They talk about being number one, or being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based on what metric? Based on what time frame? These are infinite games. And when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there's a few very predictable things that happen. Trust declines, cooperation declines, innovation declines, and eventually we run out of the will or the resources to play, and in business we call this bankruptcy or merger and acquisition. So I had a real-life experience that helped me see the difference between a finite player and an infinite player. I spoke at an education summit for Apple. I also spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. At the Microsoft summit, I would say 70 to 80% of the executives spent the majority of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple Summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with where they were going, one was obsessed with a vision, the other one was obsessed with beating their competition. Guess which one was in quagmire? Guess which one was wasting will and resources? So at the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. The Zune was Microsoft's response to the iPod. And this little piece of technology was absolutely spectacular. It was brilliant. It was beautifully designed. It was elegant. It worked flawlessly. The user interface was intuitive. So at the end of my Apple talk, I'm sharing a taxi with a senior Apple executive, employee number 54 to be specific. And I couldn't help myself. I had to stir the pot. And I turned to him and I said, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune. It is so much better than your iPod Touch. To which he responded, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because the infinite player understands sometimes you have the better product and sometimes they have the better product. And sometimes you're ahead and sometimes you're behind. And the goal is not to win, the goal is to outlast. And the only true competitor in the infinite game is ourselves. The goal is to make our systems better this year than they were last year, to make our governance better this year than it was last year, to make our culture stronger this year than it was last year, to make the quality of our relationships and the level of trust better than it was last year. That's the goal of the infinite player, to outdo themselves. So this all raises a very interesting question. If too many leaders are leading with a finite mindset, and the reality is so many of these games that we're actually playing in are infinite games, that means we have to learn how to change the way we lead to lead for the game we're actually in. So I've boiled it down to 5 things of how to lead in the infinite game. We need to have a just cause. We need to have trusting teams. We need to have a worthy rival. We need to have a capacity for existential flexibility. And we need to have the courage to lead. Just cause. A just cause is a cause so just, we would be willing to sacrifice our interests in order to advance that cause. That could mean taking a job for less money because I believe in what we're doing here. It happens very often that we're doing something we believe in and someone wants to bring us to their company and they think that simply by showering us with money we'll leave. But when we believe desperately in the work that we're doing, we easily turn down the better salary. That's a sacrifice in order to be a part of something we believe in. Maybe working late hours or frequent business trips, being away from our families. We don't like these things, but for some reason, it feels worth it. It feels worth the sacrifice to be a part of something larger than ourselves. And every leader with the capacity to lead for the infinite game offers their people a sense of just cause. Steve Jobs famously believed that the individual should stand up to Big Brother. It wasn't about computers per se, it wasn't about design, but he saw the computer as the perfect tool to empower individuals to stand up to the status quo. He imagined a world in which one day, one person with a computer could compete against a corporation. Well, that's the world we live in today. This is what his just cause was. And all the people who believed in that kind of individual power were drawn to Apple. They wanted to work there and they wanted to buy from Apple. It's not an accident that creative people and young people were so drawn to the brand. They like the idea of standing up to Big Brother, standing up to the status quo. We must give our people a sense of just cause, a cause so just they would be willing to sacrifice in order to advance that infinite ideal, a vision of the world that does not yet exist. Number 2, we have to have trusting teams. I was on a business trip in Las Vegas, and they put me up at the Four Seasons, beautiful hotel. And one of the reasons it's a beautiful hotel is not simply because of the fancy bed. Any hotel can buy a fancy bed. It's because of the people who work there. That when they say hello to you, you get the distinct sense that they wanted to say hello, not that they were told to say hello. We're highly attuned social animals. We can tell the difference. They happen to have a coffee bar in the lobby. And so one afternoon, I went to buy myself a cup of coffee, and the barista working that day was a young man named Noah. Noah was funny. He was engaging. I enjoyed buying a cup of coffee from him. I stood there for far too long buying a cup of coffee just because I enjoyed talking to Noah. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, "Do you like your job?" And without skipping a beat, Noah says to me, "I love my job." Now, in my line of business, that's significant. Like is rational. I like the people, I like the challenge, I get paid well, I like my job. Love is emotional. It demonstrates an emotional connection to whatever we're doing. Do you love your wife? I like her a lot. It's a different standard, right? Noah said, "I love my job." So immediately, I'm interested. So I follow up. I said to Noah, "Tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would say to me, you love your job." And again, without skipping a beat, Noah said that throughout the day, managers will walk past him and ask him how he's doing. Ask him if there's anything that he needs to do his job better. Not just his manager, any manager. And then he said, "I also work for a different hotel. And there, the managers walk past me and catch me if I'm doing something wrong. There, they're always overbearing and trying to make sure that I make my numbers." He says, "There, I just like to get through the day, keep my head below the radar, and just collect my paycheck." He said, "Only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself." This is the exact same human being, and yet the level of performance will be completely different, not because of him, but because of the leadership environment in which he's working. I get this question all the time. "Simon, how do we get the most out of our people?" They're not a towel that we wring them to see how much we can get out of them. The question is flawed. The correct question is, what environment do I have to create? What do I have to do to help my people work at their natural best? That's called leadership. And when we can create a trusting team, teams in which people feel trusted and trusting, what will happen is it makes them feel safe enough to raise their hand and say, "I made a mistake," or "I'm having trouble at home and it's affecting my work," or "You've promoted me to a position that I don't know what I'm doing and I need more training," or "I need help," or "I'm scared." If we do not have trusting teams, what we have is a group of people who show up to work every single day lying, hiding, and faking. They hide all of the mistakes for fear of getting in trouble. They won't admit that they don't know what they're doing for fear that they'll be humiliated. They're certainly not going to say that they're scared or that they need help for fear that it will somehow reduce their value inside the organization. And eventually, things will compound and break. We've seen what happens. I know you've seen the news a few years ago when United Airlines dragged one of their customers off the plane with a broken nose, broken teeth, and a concussion. I feel sorry for every person who works on that plane. I feel sorry for the crew because every single one of them knew that that was the wrong thing to do, and yet none of them intervened because they feared getting in trouble or breaking the rules more than doing the right thing. This was not an anomaly. This did not happen overnight. It was not that crew. It was the culture in which that crew works. I had an experience many years before that started to show the evidence. I was waiting to board a United Airlines plane on a business trip, and I witnessed a scene play out in front of me where one of the passengers attempted to board the plane before their group number was called, which, as we all know, is a serious crime. And that's exactly how the gate agent treated him. "Step aside, sir. I haven't called your group yet. Please step aside and wait till I call your group." is how she talked to a paying customer. So I spoke up. I said, why do you have to talk to us that way? Why can't you talk to us like we're human beings? And she looked me in the eye and said, sir, if I don't follow the rules, I could get in trouble or lose my job. All she revealed to me is that she was more concerned about herself than she was about her customer, is that her leaders don't trust her to do the job for which she's been trained to do. She has no agency or control over the job that she does, and guess who suffers? Customer and company. The reason we like flying Virgin Atlantic or Southwest Airlines or Emirates or any of these other airlines is not because they have some magical formula to hire the best people. It's but the people who work there feel like they have agency, that they have the power to do their job the way they've been trained to do it and make the right decisions. And guess who benefits? Customer and company. To keep playing in the infinite game, we have to have an environment in which people feel trusted and trusting. They feel that we trust them and they trust us back. That is the responsibility of leaders. Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in our charge and creating a place in which they can work at their natural best, and they will offer us their best ideas, they will take risks, they will solve problems, they will work together. It's a magical thing. Number 3, you have to have a worthy rival. There's somebody else who does what I do. He writes books, he gives talks, his work is extremely well respected. I'm a big fan of his work. I also happen to hate him. It's nothing personal, he never did anything bad to me. It's just how I feel. I hate him. And I will check my book rankings on the internet, and then I'll immediately check his book sales, and if mine are ahead, I feel smug. And if his are ahead, I feel angry. So one day we were invited to speak on the same stage together. And I don't mean him in the morning and me in the afternoon. I mean actually together. We would be interviewed on the stage together. And the interviewer thought it would be fun if we introduce each other. So I went first. And I looked at him and I said, "You make me very insecure. All of your strengths are all of my weaknesses. And when your name comes up, it makes me uncomfortable." And he turns to me and he said, "Funny, I feel the same about you." The reason I hated him was nothing personal. It's because he reminded me of my weaknesses. And it was easier for me to take that energy and put it against him and be competitive than it was to take a hard look at myself and see where I can improve. And that is the value of a worthy rival. By the way, we're best of friends now. I stay at his house. I think he's great. It was a cathartic experience. But that is the value of a rival. Our rivals are the people who are as good or better than us at our own work. And their mere existence reveals to us our weaknesses. And the goal is not to try and beat them. The goal is to take a hard look at ourselves and see where we can improve. Competition is about winning, but rivalry is about advancing. If we have a competitive attitude, then all we want to do is win the game, which means it's like two runners, and one will trip the other one in order to win. Yes, they will win the race, but they're still a slow runner. It's better to lose the race today and become stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and wish them the best of luck. And your rivalries can change depending on how well you do. In the early days, IBM was Apple's worthy rival, rather. Apple were the pirates and IBM represented the Navy. And then IBM fell out of the game. And then it was Microsoft that represented the Navy. I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. And then Microsoft fell out of the game. And now it's Google and Facebook that represent the thing that they stand apart from, that helps us understand our own identity. Who are your worthy rivals? They can be individuals, they can be organizations, they can be nation states, people we admire and push us to be better versions of ourselves. Next, you have to have the capacity for existential flexibility. What does that mean? So, Apple had already come off the success of the Apple I and the Apple II. It's already a huge company, it's already very famous and successful, and they're working on their next big project. And then, coincidentally, at that time, around 1981, Steve Jobs and some of his senior executives went on a tour of Xerox PARC. And there, Xerox showed them an innovation that they had come up with called the graphic user interface. And it would allow us to use a mouse to control the cursor on the screen to click on folders and move them around to use the computer. Prior to that, you had to know a computer language, like DOS. And remember Steve Jobs' vision. Remember his just cause, which is to empower the individual to stand up to the status quo. And when he saw this amazing innovation called the graphic user interface, he immediately saw that this was a way more powerful way to get more people to use a computer because it was so much simpler and easier to use. So as they're leaving Xerox, he says to his people, we have to invest in this. And his people say, we can't. One of the voices of reason said, Steve, we can't. We've already invested countless man-hours and millions of dollars in an entirely different strategic direction. If we reinvest in the graphic user interface, we will blow up our own company. To which Jobs actually said, better we should blow it up than someone else. That decision was the Macintosh. A computer platform so profound that the entire software of Windows is designed to work like a Macintosh. It literally changed the world, and the reason we all have a computer at home and at work is because they're so easy to use. That's existential flexibility. It's the ability to make a profoundly different strategic shift because we find a better way to advance our cause. And even if we have invested in one direction, this is better. And for the person who makes the existential flex, to the outside world, it'll look like you're crazy. Why would you abandon something that's working? But to the person who makes the existential flex, because they're so driven by cause, they perceive the risk as staying in the path that they're on. That it is a much smaller risk. It's the obvious thing that they have to do to adjust. Kodak did the opposite. George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, had a just cause about democratizing photography, and everything the company did was about making photography simpler and simpler and simpler. And in 1975, the company invented the digital camera, and they suppressed the technology for fear that it would cannibalize film sales. They knew that they had about 10 years before someone else would figure it out, and over the course of those 10 years, they did nothing. And sure enough, more companies started to introduce digital technology. In fact, Kodak made billions of dollars from the royalties they got from their patents for the digital technology. And when those patents ran out, they went bankrupt. Because if you're not willing to blow up your own company, the market will blow it up for you. Existential flexibility is the capacity to make a significant strategic shift because you find a better way to advance your cause. And only infinite players have that capacity, which means everybody else runs out of time and money. Finally, you have to have the courage to lead. Everything that I've told you today is unbelievably difficult. To be cause-driven in a world where all of the pressures on us are short-term is incredibly difficult. For those of you who work in government, you're not as used to being short-term oriented. It's more long-term oriented, and it is about serving the greater good. But for business, all the pressures from Wall Street, all the incentive structures are all about near-term, near-term, near-term. And I would contend that one of the reasons government and business sometimes struggle to actually work well together is because one is thinking extremely long-term and thinking about the greater good, and the other is thinking extremely short-term and thinking what's good for me. And the problem is those are different attitudes of working together. And in my experience, government keeps looking to business to learn how to do things, and I would challenge businesses to start looking at government to learn how to do things. That maybe a long-term mindset and thinking about how we devote our lives to a life of service, which can still be extremely profitable. The most infinite organizations are some of the most profitable. Apple, Southwest Airlines, Patagonia, Virgin. These are incredibly infinite thinkers, and they're some of the most profitable companies in their industries because of their cause, because of their teams, because of their ability to innovate. This takes tremendous courage to lead in a way in which the vast majority of people are leading in a different way. It's about challenging conventional mindsets about leadership, which all raises the final question. What does it mean to live an infinite life? Clearly, our lives are finite. We're born, we die. But life is infinite. We come, we go, and the game continues with us or without us, which means every single one of us has the choice of how we choose to live our lives, how we choose to lead our organizations. We can lead with a finite mindset, try and make more money than our friends, try and get ahead faster than everybody else, try and achieve more power than anybody else, and when we die, we take none of it with us. But the choice to live an infinite life means we choose to build an organization that will be better off because we work there. We will leave it in better shape than we found it. It means to be the kind of friend and leader to others that they will be better because we were in their lives. It means we will literally live on beyond ourselves. It's just a choice whether we choose to live with an infinite mindset or a finite mindset. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Good. Thank you for an incredibly insightful talk. I'll start with an easy one. You mentioned Noah.
Yes.
And that got me thinking as to, are leaders born or made? Can we build leadership in everyone?
Yeah. Leadership is a skill like any other. Some people seem to be born with it, but the reality is it's the experiences they had when they were younger. They were lucky that they got to have either good mentors or good experiences that helped them learn leadership at a younger age. But leaders are made. It's a skill like any other. It's a learnable, practicable skill. It's like going to the gym. You commit yourself to that practice and you build the muscle. I like to think of it like parenting, that everybody has the capacity to be a parent, but not everybody should be a parent, and not everybody wants to be a parent. Leadership is the same. We all have the capacity for leadership. Not everybody should be a leader, and not everybody wants to be a leader. And the reason is it comes at personal sacrifice. Like a parent, we have to put the people around us first. We have to care that they rise and they do well in the world. But yes, it's a learnable skill.
Now, this gets me thinking then, how, so over, I guess, the past century, we've always, to some extent, confused management with leadership. That I need to have a certain title, certain position for me to be a leader, and vice versa for people to have that inside on us.
So leadership has nothing to do with rank. I know many people who sit at the highest levels of organizations who are not leaders. They have authority, and we do as they tell us because they have authority over us, but we would not choose to follow them. And yet I know many people at lower levels that have little authority, and yet they've made the choice to look after the person to the left of them, and they've made the choice to look after the person to the right of them, and we would trust them and follow them anywhere. What rank and authority give us is the ability to lead at greater scale. But the rank itself is not what makes you a leader. It just gives you a leadership position.
Jack Ma says that he collected the team that is much smarter than he is, and his role as a leader of Alibaba was just to be able to manage people. It sounds much easier than what it is. In your opinion, what does that mean?
It is much more difficult. Leadership is hard, like parenting is hard. It's an imperfect science and art. You're juggling your own egos, the egos of others. You're juggling human beings, which are messy. But the thing that I admire about what he said was, and this is the sign of somebody with at least a sense of good leadership, which is I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I don't have to be. In fact, I shouldn't be. And what I'm going to provide is a sense of cause for my people to commit their lives to, which gives their work meaning. And I'm going to clear a path for them and help them where they need my help. But otherwise, my goal is to make sure that they have what they need and stay out of their way.
In a sense that there's that humility.
There's a humility, absolutely.
That someone needs to swallow their pride and let others do their jobs. But it is a milestone for many leaders for them to get to that point.
Absolutely, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's the way we're raised sometimes. And sometimes we're raised in a fear-based hierarchy where to admit that we're not the smartest may open us up to humiliation or even the possibility of being laid off next year. You see this very often amongst older middle managers where they hoard information and don't share it with younger people. They don't share their experiences, they don't share their lessons, they don't share because they think falsely that that's what gives them job security. And it's such a shame because they could make the team around them so much stronger. But it's a fear-based mentality.
Then this leads me to think about sort of, you have civilizations in which for centuries they have not seen their leadership as a fear of losing honor, faith, and on the other hand you have leaders in which they need to be present. They need to come to conferences and speak in conferences like this for their constituents or others to give them respect. So we have two very opposing ideals. And what I want to ask is, are leaders heard or viewed?
So money is a redeemable resource. Right. We make money, we spend money, we lose money, we make more money, right? But time and energy are non-redeemable. When you give someone time or you give someone energy, there's no getting it back. And so when a leader gives time or energy to us, we know that that is unbelievably valuable because we know that they could be doing something else and we know that their time is valuable. We do that all the time. When we send an email to somebody very senior to us, we start the email with, "I know you're busy, but." The first thing we show is deference to their time. So when you see a general visit the front lines, they're very busy, and yet they just go walk amongst the troops. It says something to the rank and file. When leaders give an audience to hear what you're up to, or they come and visit a factory, it does an amazing thing to give time and energy to something. So I'm a great believer that leaders should be seen and should be heard. They should have busy public schedules, as opposed to living in an ivory tower, which may produce a sense of mystery and myth, but it's unstable.
Yeah. So this leads me again to a question that is very based on today's times. That the saying goes that technology leads or breeds impatience. I don't want to say how can we guide this generation, because I see a lot of the older generation that are just as impatient. Yep. So how can we have people sort of be able to be more patient in the sense that be able, whenever we speak about leadership regardless of scale or hierarchy, that they're able to be patient, and in the sense that can we be patient enough to lead to or to get to to play the infinite game?
I think that there's an old Chinese saying, which I love, a little Chinese parable. There's a young man who's born with remarkable ability for horse riding, and everybody in the village says, "You're so lucky," and the monk says, "We'll see." And then he falls off his horse and breaks his leg, and his career is ruined. And everyone in the village says, "You're so unlucky." And the monk says, "We'll see." And then war breaks out, and all the young men are sent to battle, but he can't go because of his broken leg. And everyone in the village says, "You're so lucky." And the monk says, "We'll see." And I think this is what patience breeds. I think this is what an infinite mindset produces, which is we don't see any action or any result as final. They're stepping stones, and sometimes they help us, and sometimes we fall back. And all of us have had very negative experiences in our lives that we will say, "I never want to do that again, but I'm glad it happened because I learned so much." Yeah. Yeah. Every great leader has had tremendous failure. There's no such thing as hockey sticks of success. It just doesn't exist. And so I think an infinite mindset allows us to just take things in stride and maintain positivity and not see any particular result as final, which also yields humility. So we don't believe bad results are the end, but we also don't think that we're amazing because we had good results. Everything is a little more tempered.
But then going back to your metaphor of the monk, especially depending on the sector you work at, if it's based on public opinion, that someone says, all right, we have this long-term plan and we need to be patient, or we need to take things easy as X, Y, and Z. How would, in your opinion, how can someone, I know it's much easier said than done, how can someone be able to lead to lead a nation, corporate?
So when I talk about having an infinite mindset, that doesn't mean the absence of finite games. There are always finite games within the infinite game, but they exist within a context. And metrics are extremely important. We need metrics. As human beings, we are very tangibly driven. We need to see and measure progress to feel progress. I can't just say, I'll give you a bonus if you do more. How much more? Tell me, give me a target. Give me something to reach for. It's like running a marathon and there's no markers along the way. You don't know how fast you're going, you don't know how far you're going. And so when public opinion matters and you have an infinite mindset, it's extremely good to have milestones. It's extremely good to give progress reports so that people can see the steps that are being taken towards the vision. We'll never get there because it's an infinite game, but we'll die trying, which is the point. And all the milestones are proof that we're moving in the right direction, and also being honest about some of the things that push us back.
I want to talk about what made you write your book, or what was the spark that made you write the book that you authored, starting with the why?
Start with why was born out of the loss of my own passion. So I had a career, it was a successful career, and I fell out of love. And I didn't know what to do with that feeling because I was embarrassed. Because my life superficially was good. I made a decent living, I had amazing clients, we did good work, but I didn't want to wake up and do it again in the morning. And so I pretended that I was happier, more successful, and more in control than I felt. I was lying, hiding, and faking, just because I was embarrassed. And that's not a good way to live. And there was a confluence of events, and I discovered that every single one of us knows what we do. Everybody can tell you their job. Some of us can tell you how we do it, the things that we think make us stand out from those who do what we do, also do what we do. But very, very, very few people can clearly articulate why we do what we do. I don't mean to make money, that's a result. I mean, what's the purpose, what's the cause, what's the belief? Why did we get out of bed this morning, and why should anyone care? And I realized that that's what was missing in my life. I knew what I was doing, I knew how to do it, but I couldn't tell you why I was doing it. And the reason I felt uncomfortable is I'd lost any sense of purpose or cause in my life. And it was the rediscovery of my why that not only restored my passion, but pushed me in a direction that I find myself here.
And would you mind me asking why, or when, or at what age were you when?
This all went down when I was 32.
Because I've recently read that there's something called the quarter-life crisis, where someone that is in their 20s, they've left college, they just started to work, throughout their university years, they reach a point where they've been told that, if you study X, Y, and Z, you'll be this incredible person. And then once they reach the job market, it's not the case. Reality hits them in the face, so to speak. And that ends up, the quarter-life crisis happens. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would argue that part of that is due to the fact that we do a poor job of preparing people for when they graduate. Okay. Think about it, when we're young, our parents and guidance counselors tell us, get a job. Nobody says, get a job you love. We're told to weigh the pay package of one company versus the pay package of another company. We're never told to weigh, do you like the people you're going to work for here? Do you like the people you're going to work for there? Because you're going to spend more time with those people than you will with your own family and friends. Yeah. So I think one of the reasons is we poorly prepare people on how to make a decision on how to choose a job or choose a career. And so by the time we get there, I think it shakes the system. I think the quarter-life crisis shouldn't have to happen.
I agree.
Yeah.
So you, throughout your books, in your talks, you've spoken a lot from a corporate perspective. And since we're in the World Government Summit, it's fair to ask leadership in the private sector versus government. What differs? Are there some shared similar values and purposes?
Leadership is leadership no matter where you go. And the purpose of leadership is the same, right? And good leadership will be the same no matter what. Government and NGO tends to be a little better at cause, but sometimes falls short on structure, accountability metrics. Business tends to be really good at the structure and accountability metrics, and sometimes falls pretty short on cause and something purposeful. So it's not that, I think government leadership and business leadership are not different. I think they're worthy rivals.
Okay.
I think they could learn from each other, and each reveals the other's weaknesses.
Would you mind giving examples?
I meet people in business, and to them, the incentives are short-term and about themselves. How can I get a promotion, and how can I get a bonus? And the company sets up the incentive structures to get something out of you by rewarding you. In government, under good government leadership, it tends to be more, look what we're doing, and the reward tends to be more communal, and it tends to be more shared, and we view ourselves as a piece of a machine rather than I'm the champion. And I think they can both learn a little bit from each other.
Then, because in this part of the world and elsewhere, you see a lot of interchange in terms of people going from private to government, government to private, and as a result of what you just mentioned in terms of that incentivized aspect, that differs, and that takes, you have to relearn how to ride the bike again. What would you say about that in the sense of, are there some core aspects that can be just a plug and play?
So when people go from private sector to government, they complain about the pace of things. Things get slower, and there's more bureaucracy. When people go from government to private sector, they complain about the loss of camaraderie, the loss of brotherhood and sisterhood, that everybody's out for themselves, they miss the trust. So there's always a sense of loss. I think the universal truth, which is missing in both, is good leadership curriculum. I think we can do much better in private sector and much better in government in teaching people how to lead. We expect that they're learning it somewhere else. We hope that they're getting it from university or MBAs, which they don't. And then we put them in a leadership position. It's like when someone's junior in their job, we give them tons of training. How to sell, or how to use the computer system, or how to work the machine. Tons of training how to do their job. And if they're good at that job, we'll promote them. And eventually they get promoted to a position where they're now responsible for the people who do the job that they used to do, but we don't teach them how to do that. Leadership is a skill, and it's a completely different skill from doing your job. You're no longer responsible for the results. You're now responsible for the people who are responsible for the results.
Similar to the United Airlines example.
Similar to the United Airlines example.
That is just, I'm just doing my job. To some extent, I wouldn't care what's right. Then how can, and this can go from corporate to government, how can we ensure that the employees and people in that organization care about, so they make it so that what is right is good for their organization and their fellow colleagues? So
again, the skills of leadership, we don't teach, right? So I'll tell you, so I had the chance to visit Quantico Marine Base in Quantico, Virginia, where the United States Marines select their officers. And one of the things I witnessed is they do something called the LRC, the Leadership Reaction Course, which is basically 20 mini obstacle courses with problem solving, where you take, for example, 3 planks of wood of different sizes, and you have to get across the little pool of water with all of your people and all of your material. And when they evaluate how well the leader did, nowhere on the list does it say if they made it to the other side. There's not even a checkbox, yes or no. Because the Marines understand that sometimes good leaders suffer mission failure and sometimes bad leaders enjoy mission success. And they understand that what determines a good leader is not if they were successful, but if they have the qualities of good leadership.
Yeah.
And if you have the qualities of good leadership, you're more likely to succeed more often over time. And so what they look for is to incentivize and train and teach those qualities. We don't incentivize, train, or teach those qualities in business or in government. Things like listening skills, things like empathy, things like effective confrontation. I mean, no matter what kind of organization you work in, it's people.
Yeah.
It's always human beings. And we don't know how to give compliments, we don't know how to give criticism, we don't know how to coach people, we don't know, but these are all things that we can learn. So I think we can all do a much better job of teaching the human skills. I don't like calling them soft skills. We're talking hard skills and soft skills. There are hard skills and there's human skills. And I think we can do a much better job across the board of teaching human skills.
I wanted to ask about us essentially as a species, as humans. Do we have the same purpose to work on or be a part of something much greater? That to say, oh, I've worked on this, even though my name is not in there, or my name is on there, and I worked on this.
So it's funny you bring that up. In doing the research for my new book, I stumbled across a pattern that I didn't expect to find. That when, especially nations, but when we want to inspire large populations of people to sacrifice for something bigger than themselves, there seems to be always three things that show up. So the Declaration of Independence, the document that Thomas Jefferson wrote that basically established the reason why America needed to exist, talked about all men are created equal, endowed with three unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there was something to do with safety, there was something to do with an ideology, which in this case was liberty, and there was something to do with economic gain. The establishing document that established the Soviet Union, that Lenin wrote, offered the people three things: military safety, the strong military, an ideology that we would all be a part of, in this case communism, and an economic well-being. General Giap, who was the general who oversaw the Tet Offensive, wrote a document called the People's War, in which he said the way that we will do well as a nation is three things: physical safety, an ideology that we feel a part of, and economic stability. So it seems that this pattern of three things, and even when the signers of the Declaration of Independence, they said we will all pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our honor. Life, money, ideology. Right? So it seems that if we want to inspire people to be a part of something bigger, we have to offer them something to do with their physical safety. This is why some politicians do well when they talk about fighting crime. Well, that's only one thing. And then that's why some do well when they talk about economic well-being. Well, that's only one thing. And the other thing is ideology, to be a part of a cause or a vision, the just cause bigger than ourselves. But it seems we need all three. They balance off of each other.
Two questions regarding that. One, why three?
I have no idea. Look, people talk about the law of threes, and three is a very sort of comfortable number. And you know, I don't. And even when I did why, how, what, why not four things? Yeah. I don't know the biology of it, but I suspect there is a balance, and they can't all be there at the same time, you know. And so it's like a relationship. It's like a friendship or a marriage. We want the other person to make us feel physically safe. We want to feel like we're doing something big together, raising a family, and then we want to have economic well-being. Those things don't all happen necessarily at the same time. And so I think if two are good, they allow for you can flow, and because they're unpredictable. So I think three is you can balance on two when you're missing one.
And any leaders of the past that were able to hit the trifecta, in your opinion?
Well, I think these examples that we've talked about, And I think some of the leaders that we admire and who have stood out throughout history, was it Nelson Mandela or Winston Churchill or FDR or Mahatma Gandhi, I think they talk in terms of ideology, they talk in terms of safety, and they talk in terms of economic well-being.
So, and these leaders and all these three principles, during their founding, regardless of which nation, there was this going against the grain, the status quo, and especially in government. Doing that takes a lot of effort. There are reasons why we have these bureaucracies and reasons why we have these policies and processes. But going against the status quo is what, in order to create a diamond, you need the pressure, you need that change, you need that evolution. What is I wouldn't say the right way of doing it, but what is sort of a set that needs to happen prior to successfully, in some cases, go against the status quo and succeed?
So, I'm tired of I'm tired of consultants telling us that people fear change. People don't fear change. People fear sudden change, right? Sudden change is about revolution. It's often violent, it's often sudden, and there's always a counter-revolution. But subtle change is like evolution, where you change a piece here, you change a piece there, and before you know it, life is entirely different, and there's no going back.
Yeah.
And so I believe that there's a time and place for revolutionary change, but when there's stability in the government, that evolutionary change is a good thing, but there still has to be purpose and cause. And I think one of the ways in which we bring people along for the ride and that they will embrace change is that they perceive vision, that they understand why we are doing this. And what good leaders do is they paint a picture of what the future will look like in terms so clearly that I can understand and then see myself standing in that world. They don't just talk generically like it's going to be better. Yeah. Martin Luther King, in his famous speech, said, "I have a dream that one day little black children will hold hands on the playground with little white children." He was talking in visual terms. It's why we call it vision, because we have to be able to see it. Vision is not a number. Vision is not something ethereal. Vision is like, and visionary leaders, they've actually done work on this. When they speak, they don't speak in the future tense, they actually speak in the present tense. In other words, they think of the vision as so clear and it might as well be here now. And it's inspiring. And all the best leaders have always painted a picture of a future state, that it's different than the one now, that we feel that we can commit ourselves to that noble cause.
But then how are you able to, because everything, or to all of us, individually, we have different motivations that don't usually translate sometimes from bottom to top to bottom. And when we talk about governments that employ thousands upon thousands of people, how is it so that leaders, regardless of where they are in the hierarchy, are able to match that individual motivation, that we need to do this change because X or Y or Z, because it matches your own personal drive and motivation?
We want leaders to have different opinions, of course. We want leaders to offer different ideas and be critical of the path that we're on. We don't just want yes men around us, but we do need to have shared values. There is a foundation that there has to be consistency in shared values and shared cause. Nation states, cities, or companies have cultures, and you have different cultures. So in the United States, there's a culture called American, and it has certain qualities. You either like those things or you don't like those things. And if you like them, you go live there, and if you don't like them, you don't go live there. But even within that culture, there are subcultures. There's Los Angeles and there's New York. I have to believe that the culture of Abu Dhabi and the culture of Dubai are different. It's still one nation, but you either feel that you belong here or you feel that you belong there.
Okay.
And so a nation is the same thing, which is we should articulate our values, articulate our vision, and those who feel that this is what I stand for, this is where I belong, they're excited to be a part of the government, they're excited to be a part of the cause, and if not, they won't. And so if we just make it a job, oh, you can have stability because it's a government job, it's not values-based, and that's where you start to have tension, because now people are coming in for self-interest. But the clearer the values are, the more easily you attract people who are drawn to those values, and the more easily you can filter out people who don't share those values.
Is there a recent example that you can share with us that at least we can relate to, that this has been done quite
at a nation state level, or
perhaps, yeah.
Well, I mean, some of the things that I talked about, Apple talked about challenging the status quo, and so it attracted people who like that idea, even to go work for the company. It was a rallying cry. Safe was for other companies. In my own organization, we talk about the vision of creating a world in which the vast majority of people wake up in the morning inspired, feel safe at work, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. The people who want to work with us or work for us share that vision. The people we want to work with share that vision. And when somebody just wants to increase their bottom line, we say no, because it's about shared cause and shared values. And we're very clear about our values. I think that incentive structures need to reward not just performance, but also adherence to values. So often in organizations, I hear it all the time. There's a salesperson who's so good, but everybody knows they're cancerous and toxic to the organization. And when I ask, why don't you get rid of them? They say, their numbers are so good, right? So you're sacrificing your values for a short-term financial gain, which, by the way, is hurting everybody else. So I think the ability to make difficult decisions with values in mind is what makes an organization or a government better able to build an infinite infrastructure. And you mentioned that some people may go into government for that short-term stability and safety. And when government is, I guess, revitalized or asked to change, and this can even go in a corporate aspect, where the employee or the colleague reaches a point where they reach a slump and they plateau. And in many government institutions, that is fine. Plateau, as long as you do your job and don't hurt anyone. But you're not excelling. You're not creating that impact. And as we've seen recently, it's not enough. And there needs to be that matching of the values, as well as making sure that they want to be a part of it. How can we reignite, restart the batteries, so to speak, when it comes to organizations that have such, in my opinion, an epidemic? So I subscribe to something called the law of diffusion of innovations. For me, it's the thing that I've built my whole career on. And basically, what the law of diffusion of innovation says, any population, regardless of its size, sifts across the standard deviation, the bell curve. If you have high performers, you have low performers, and then you have an average, right? If you want to have the ability to create long-term change or long-term stability or spread an idea or a cultural change, what we usually do is we aim at the middle, we aim at the bell, we aim at the average, and we try and offer them kinds of things to come along with us, usually financial. But what the law of diffusion tells us is the first 2% of our population, 2.5% of our population are our innovators. These are the big thinkers. Then you have about 12 or 13%, which are your early adopters. They're very comfortable with change. They have a high risk tolerance. They're very comfortable being a part of something that reflects their values. Then you have the majority, which is more cynical, more practical. What's in it for me? They care about price, quality, service, and features. And then you have the laggards, which, the only reason they bought a DVD player is because they stopped selling VCRs, What the law of diffusion tells us is that if you want to affect long-term change, you actually don't go to the middle. You go to the innovators and the early adopters. You speak in terms of vision. You speak in terms of values. You offer them the opportunity to be a part of something. And if you can get 15 to 18% of the population to embrace it, you hit a tipping point, and it just goes. And the reason is because the early majority will not try something until somebody else has tried it first. So instead of forcing them to do it, We invite people to do it. So whenever I do programs inside organizations, big and small, that we want to change people's behavior inside the organization. So for example, I did a millennial training program with a large company, and the management wanted to implement the millennial training program and roll it out to the whole company. You know, tens and tens and tens of thousands of people across the nation. And my recommendation was, let's do it very small. You have to apply. We make it a little bit difficult to come, so it's not just online. You know, check, 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 check. We made them write an essay as to why they wanted to be there. And we read the essays. We took it seriously because we didn't want to make it too easy, because then there's no filter. We only wanted people who really wanted to be there. We made the timing difficult. We made it in the middle of the week, so they had to leave work. You know, we did that on purpose. And we got 100 really great applicants because we limited it to 100, even though there's thousands of employees. And we did one, right? 2 weeks later, one of the leaders of the company walks into me furious at me because the phone was ringing off the hook for all of the leaders across the country saying, why didn't I get this program? Where if we had rolled it out, all of those same leaders would say, we don't have time for this. Stop telling me what to do. We created demand because I knew that if you get the early adopters, eventually what that does is it creates demand from everybody else, because those 100 people went back across the country and they said, I did the most amazing thing. And they were my greatest advocates. I didn't need to advertise. I didn't need to market. I relied on the early adopters to help me spread the message. So I'm a great believer that you do something as an invitation. You put up some small barriers to make sure you get only the people who really want to be there. You make sure that you're clear about why, what the vision is, what the values are. You make no promises. I told them in the room, by being a part of this program, it may not help your career. You won't get any additional money. You're going to have to do additional work, and you're going to have to figure it out. I'm not going to help you. In other words, they really wanted it. They believed in it. Yeah. And it took on a life of its own, which is exactly what you want. So I'm not a big believer in rollouts. I'm a big believer in phased outs. Yeah.
Is there a leader that you currently, and I'm going to make it very hard, that you look up to, you respect, that to some extent inspired you, at least in the ways that you run your organization, for example?
The few people that I really turn to and think about for leadership counsel are people that are not famous. There's one guy who I met in the research for my book, Leaders Eat Last, who goes by the name Johnny Bravo. Just a remarkable human being, honest, and high integrity, and in it for others, and willing to risk for others. And just when I think, like when I'm getting impetuous or impulsive, I look to him for guidance, even if I don't talk to him. Just I know what he would do. And the other one is Bob Chapman, who I've also written about. These people I met just so service-minded, even though he's so one of them's in government, and one of them's in private sector, and yet they're both very similar. They both put people before numbers. They both believe in doing something bigger than themselves. They both believe in leaving their organizations in better shape than they found them. They both believe in empowering people. They both believe in stepping back and watching the joy of other people solve problems, like the joy of seeing our children solve something for themselves. Those two stand out for me.
You mentioned that that they both put people ahead of numbers.
Yeah.
How would I'm assuming at this point Johnny Bravo is in the private sector that
he's in government.
Oh, all right. So then how would these people be able to convince their stakeholders, shareholders, of putting people ahead of numbers?
Right. So one of the things that the infinite-minded do is they don't do convincing. They first of all, they're very good at attracting people and rejecting people. So I had a question the other day. I gave a talk in London, and it was a young entrepreneur who raised his hand and said, "So I'm stuck. I believe in everything you're talking about. I believe in building strong culture. I believe in taking care of my people. The problem is my investors are putting overwhelming pressure on me to focus on the short term and to make an exit so they can get their money. What do I do? And my question to him was, are you the founder of the company? He said, yes, I am. I said, well, you took the money. I said, you only evaluated your investors based on how much money they were going to give you. You didn't evaluate your investors based on if they believe in your cause and share your values. Why did you take their money? Because you look at Warren Buffett, for example. Warren Buffett doesn't sell the things he invests in. He invests in people and he invests in ideas. And then he just leaves them. And I think it's the same. I think which is we are partially responsible for the people inside our organizations. We're partially responsible for the money we take. We're partially responsible for the environments we create around us. And so when those environments then put excessive pressure on us to do the wrong thing, it's partially our fault. And so so the question is, so what am I supposed to do? I still find myself in this situation. And so what you'll find is that those people like Bob Chapman, they'll make the decision anyway. And over the course of time, they're proved right. Because over the course of time, those infinite leaders, their results tend to be better over the course of time. They tend to be more stable. It tends not to be like this. If you look at Jack Welch at GE in the 80s and 90s, the performance of GE was like this. It's up and down and up and down. And if you were lucky to sell when it was high, great. But it could be down the next day. Where more infinite organizations like Costco, it's just a slow, beautiful, steady path. And it's not as exciting, but it's very stable. And it doesn't look, because if you look at it in the course of 1 year, GE may look like this in 1 year, where Costco looks like this in 1 year. But if you look at it over the course of 10 years, GE looks like this, and Costco looks like this.
It has a bit more of a sustainability.
It has more sustainability.
To some extent, exponential, I guess?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So if you invested in Costco the year that it went public, and you invested in GE when the same year when Costco went public, which is, I think, the early 80s, you would have made, I think, I have to go back and look, but I think 600% on your money in GE, and you would have made 1,200% on your money in Costco. So you would have made 2x in Costco over General Electric. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And that proves out. I've looked at other companies. The infinite-minded companies over time always outperform the finite-minded. In the short term, maybe not. But over the course of time, 100%.
Then what about organizations that realize that they need to get into the infinite mind mentality?
So it's a process. It's like getting into shape. It's like, I've decided I want to be healthy and lose some weight. Well, you're not going to just go to the gym for 9 hours and then be in shape. That's, you don't have one salad and you're like, haha, right? I wish. It's a slow process that there are things we can do to make it a little quicker, but we can't do it quickly. So you have to start eating healthy, which comes at personal sacrifice, because I like fried chicken better.
It's much easier.
And it's much easier, right? We have to start going to the gym, which hurts. There is actually physical pain. And yet, we have to keep doing it. And we don't see the results in the short term. You go to the gym, you eat a salad, you look in the mirror, you will see nothing. And you'll go to the gym the next day and you'll eat another salad and you'll look at the mirror and you will see nothing. And so you think, well, there's no results, I'm quitting. It's the exact same thing when we're converting an organization from finite to infinite, which is you go through the process. Should I start with my arms or should I start with my legs? Just start, just go. And it's some of the things we talked about. It's teaching leadership, it's empathy, it's vision, it's just cause, it's building trusting teams, it's teaching effective confrontation and listening skills. It's all these human skills that you have to do them all. And one of them is not enough. That's like just working out your arms. Yeah. You have to do it, but it's not enough. All of these things by themselves do nothing. But in combination, consistency is more important than intensity. Because companies are really good at intensity. Like we have a problem, we have a big offsite, we invite a bunch of famous speakers, everybody's a leader now, right? And governments like to solve things with intensity as well, but it's consistency, same as a relationship. You can't just remember her birthday and buy her flowers on Valentine's Day and she falls in love with you. If only. It's lots and lots and lots and lots of little things that over the course of time. So it's the same thing. It's the commitment to a process. It's the commitment to a lifestyle. It's not an event. And any single organization can become infinite, and any organization can become visionary, and every single culture can become trusting and inspiring. Some are quicker and some are slower, but it's a process that, like exercise, 100% of the time it works.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. So leadership is a lifestyle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you've been, and we discussed this in there, you've been in the UAE exactly about 24 hours.
About 26 hours, yeah.
26 hours, yes. Any insights, any thoughts?
I'm astonished by the desire of the people I've met to do something big. They speak in visionary terms. There's an appreciation of youth and vitality, and there's a risk profile. There's this desire to leave this nation in better shape than you found it. And there's a friendly competitive spirit, but you're not looking to beat anyone. And one of the things that I think I recognize about even the way you're growing your own leaders, I've never seen that in a government. I've seen youth leadership programs, but not a focused attempt to build and grow our own leaders for the future. You know, in the 80s and 90s, GE and Jack Welch were the leadership factory. That if you had GE on your resume, you could go work anywhere, right? And that has proved to be a false prophet. You know, GE and Jack Welch led with a finite mindset, and it was good for a finite period of time. And I would argue that many of the things that Jack Welch and GE promoted in the 80s and 90s are the total opposite of what we need. Shareholder supremacy is not good for business or economies. And annualized layoffs to balance the books does not help grow a strong culture inside a company. It does the opposite. But there is no heir apparent. There is no organization that I have met that has replaced GE as the leadership factory for the 21st century on how we have to lead for the infinite game. And from what I've seen and the people I've met, I now firmly believe that the UAE has the potential to be the leadership factory for the 21st century, that what you're doing to build and grow your own leaders is exportable. And I think the single greatest export you could probably offer the world is how to build organizations and how to build government. And I think we will turn to the UAE in the future. You have the potential to be the leadership factory for the 21st century.
So no pressure on everyone. We're all good. I guess on that note, we've ran out of time. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Appreciate it.
And we hope to see you soon. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.